Welcome to Genomics Gupshup, episode number 52. Genomics Gupshup is an initiative by Map My Genome to create a community around genomics and to simplify genomics for everyone. I'm Anu Acharya, your host for this exciting podcast. And we are creating this community by bringing together experts from allied areas like medicine, genetic counseling, nutrition, fitness, longevity, and more. Please join us as we spread the word about this exciting science of genomics. We are now available on your favorite podcast as well. Just search for Genomics Gupshup on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, or Google Podcasts. Today, we are delighted because we have someone that I've known for many years, Michael Geer, who is not just creating a revolution in the health space, but I think in some ways, he's taking the health of humanity to the next gear. Is that okay? Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you. It's awesome to be here, and awesome to be speaking with a long and very close friend.
Thank you. Thanks. I think the first time we met was way at 97. What degree north is that? Back in the Arctic. Yeah. But let's
as you do. That's where you meet your best friends there, right?
Exactly. Yes. So, Michael, can you first tell us a little bit about your background? You've been a serial entrepreneur. Humanity is your current venture, but you've also done many other things before this as well. So maybe if you can help us a little bit with your background and what made you start Humanity in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. I'll try to give you the shortened version. As you get older, it starts getting longer and longer. So I wanted, if I look back, I wanted to do something that wasn't status quo. As a little kid, as many little kids, astronaut seemed like as non-status quo as you could get. And so I did aerospace engineering in school because I think I read for research for 30 seconds that like aerospace engineer and Air Force pilot were the two most common careers of future astronauts. At a certain point, kind of was also obsessed with the space program, obviously. Started getting quite interested, probably watched The Hunt for Red October one too many times, which is a movie about a Soviet submarine commander defecting. And basically wanted to go over and see the other side. And for a person growing up in the US, that was like Soviet Union, Russia. And so went over to Moscow, met a guy, and we ended up starting what became the largest dating site in the world. For better or for worse, depending on everybody's personal experience, it kind of started the whole, dating app phenomenon.
When was that?
Sorry, when was it?
Yeah.
It was, so we got together in 2005. I think we launched Badoo in 2006.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, different era, pre-iPhone. It's like a BC almost, like pre-iPhone. And so, yeah, very website focused in the beginning, took our payments through premium SMS because credit cards, you couldn't make small charges back then, all those sort of things. But that gave me my first taste of like creating something basically that millions of people, we grew very fast. I think 2 years in, we had like 20 million users. And creating something that millions of people were using and that were changing their lives. And we were trying to make that for the better. And so I think at a certain point, basically had a relative find out stage 4 about cancer. As a lot of the great work that you guys are doing is helping people kind of, get ahead of that and get on a better path. And so my question at that point was like, why aren't we screening everybody for cancer? This seems super dangerous that people, in the middle of a city with general access to healthcare are still finding out stage 4. Didn't start a health tech startup immediately, but that started to be a thread in my life that I spent more and more time on, which was basically first, why aren't we screening everybody for cancer? How can we do better? The answer at the time actually led me to genetics, because the main answer that was given was too many false positives in the current cancer screening tests. which means that people would take a screening test and they might be told that you might have cancer, but then they end up not having cancer. And so it would cause a lot of, more stress and more problems for them. At least that's the logical line of thinking. And so I started to look heavily into genetics because of early detection of cancer. Led me to, when I went out to the Valley, actually take some genetics courses, at Stanford. And yeah, so that has been my base in health science, is genetics. That was my first real entry into, outside of, did engineering, but that was my first entry into actually, health science. And so I went out to the Valley, left Badu and went out to the Valley to took over operations at a consumer VPN out there. Ostensibly, our mission was to get rid of censorship on the internet, meaning don't allow governments and others to block websites and block information, give people free access to information. And in the course of that, moved out to the Valley and started meeting more people that were more in the longevity space. So they would name themselves as longevity folks. Longevity now has merged more and more into health. So it's almost like there's not two categories anymore, but back then it was more of a label. And they convinced me, because these were scientists, right? And you spend a lot of time with scientists, like they're not the best marketers. They're not trying to, they're not good at selling stuff. But that's a good thing too, is that when you're talking to them, you're just getting like straight information from them. They're not trying to like sway you in one direction or the other. And really convinced me that it was possible to do two things. One is measure your rate of aging, so how fast you're losing function in your body. And the other is that you could do something about it. And a lot of their work that they were doing is stuff that's now in human trials and more on kind of like the biotech side. But it was also apparent from their research that there was a ton of lifestyle actions and those sorts of stuff that was already available to people. They just needed a good way to know, to measure it, periodically or continuously, to know if the things that they're trying are working. And so the last piece of this whole answer is met many people along the way, including George Church and others that were so kind with their time, that helped me get up to speed on everything. But finally met a woman named Kristen Fortney, who runs a company called BioAge that actually has a few drugs in human trial that are looking very promising. That's a statement from me, not from from her. I don't think you're allowed to make forward-looking statements. And so she turned me on to the idea that you could look at longitudinal data sets, namely biobanks. So basically these places where what biobanks do is they take in like 100,000 people or 500,000 people as participants. They try to get a diverse population, and then they just monitor those people for 10, 20, 30 years. And along that time, they're taking a lot of measurements on them, genetics, some epigenetics, a lot of blood markers, a lot of different measurements. And so what they also have is what happens to those people health-wise. So you have this great thing where the body was measured 20 years ago or 10 years ago, and then you actually know that, okay, this person had a heart attack, this person got diagnosed with diabetes, this person. And so from that, you can make predictive models where then someone can come to you as a new user, and you now have a model to have some understanding of their future probability of those diseases. And that then becomes a feedback loop. And so once she turned me on to that idea, which honestly, before that, I didn't understand how you measure health. Like you measure your cholesterol? Okay, great. Your cholesterol goes down. Does that mean you're going to be much healthier? Or maybe not. And so that was the last piece. And then I brought in my co-founder, Peter Ward. I always say I didn't have a short list. I had a one-person list. It's like, I need to get Pete as my co-founder in this. And we started Humanity. And really our mission is to give 1 billion years of health back to humanity by 2030. And we do that. One of the big pieces of that is giving people a quicker feedback loop on whether their biological age, their probability of future disease, is it getting worse or better. And so that allows them to understand, I'm doing all this stuff. Is it working to make me healthier? Yeah. So that's hopefully that didn't take all of our time. But
no, not at all, not at all.
Yeah.
No, I think it's great. I think that sets a lot of context in terms of why you're building this, why you built humanity in the first place, and a little bit about what it does. I know I've been a user of the app, and I love it. I think there is something about it that is addictive in a sense that you do check in every day, and I think seeing your numbers improve, basically showing that you're growing younger in some ways, I think makes everyone feel good if you're doing the right things. So I think
Yep.
that's probably the principles behind in some ways using, I don't know what you'll use, but the addictiveness of the game or gamification of the whole process, I think in itself is part of the whole, I think, joy of doing the right things for yourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's kind of learning and doing. So, one of the aha moments that a lot of people have is because traditionally the thought is like, if I want to be healthy, I'm either going to the gym or I'm not going to the gym. And what people learn with our app is that, hey, I walk down the street to get a coffee and I open up the app and I get a ping. Oh, I got a point for that. Oh, I wasn't even thinking of that as a health action in my day, right? Or I got an extra 30 minutes of sleep and I get an extra couple points. And so I think it's those things that allow people that are into fitness to diversify, because some people are not actually healthy fitness people. They're do a HIIT training and then sit at their desk all the rest of the day kind of folks. It lets them diversify, including things like meditation. But then people that always kind of categorize themselves as like, I'm just not a health and fitness person, it helps them understand that that's not how it works. Like every single small action you take throughout the day counts. So
it's that pursuit of, or getting to that level of doing those little things that counts, right? And I
yeah,
think
and the consistency of them, and then finally having that feedback loop that it did all this stuff work, or is it just, did I just get sold a bunch of content online that the new fad, and I'm going to be told in a couple months that actually I need to do something different. So.
And so clearly, I think this is not something that was, commonly found everywhere. So I'm sure you faced a lot of challenges in the early days, and I'm sure that there are some that continue even today. So what were some of those challenges while you were building the app?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to gripe, because I think me and Pete we had the easier track because of our past record. Pete started one of the first social networks. I had a couple of successes with Badu and Anchor Free. I would say more what we needed to combat is kind of entrenched thinking about health. Two of them, and one of them I encountered just a day ago. Well, in the last few days. I guess when we publish this, it won't be as clear. But talking with a founder of another company that's in health, and this attitude that like, oh yeah, 80% of the people don't actually want to be healthy. They don't care about their health. And that, I think if you talk to every single person on the street, well, you'll find out that's not true. Just completely not true. Our hypothesis was with humanity is like, people don't have any feedback loop, right? You go to Instagram and you add a photo. If no one liked it or commented on it, you wouldn't add any more photos, and no one would question why you didn't add any more photos. They wouldn't be like, adding photos is great. Why don't you do it? And so like with health, it's like you see your doctor, if you're lucky, you see your doctor say like once a year, and they're like, hey, just like last year, I told you should probably eat better and, exercise more, get more sleep, and do, these other things. And people leave that and they don't really have a feedback loop for, the lucky ones that are using your services have a quicker feedback loop, right? But like a lot of people only have that like once a year doctor checkup. And that's our hypothesis was like, well, that's the biggest problem. Like we need to give people, a closer feedback loop. And so that I'm very happy to say. So we have about 175,000 users now, and we've proven that people change their behavior. Like the median behavior change right now is about 16% towards healthier behaviors. That's median. So, and so we've proven that, and we've been very careful not to, we've actually done marketing to actually bring in a very wide swath of society, people that are active, people that aren't active. So we really wanted to create a mainstream product. So that was the biggest thing, is just breaking through that kind of stereotype that like, people don't want to be healthy or a large population. The second big one was it's very clear in all the science that it's the combination of things that you do that matter. Meaning if you do one thing that's categorized as good, but you don't do the other thing, this might actually become bad. So like you need to do both things for it both to be good, kind of thing. And so a lot of pushback in the consumer tech space was, hey, you guys are trying to do everything at once. So, and our answer to that was like, how else would you do it? Like, to give you an example, like most apps are either like a meditation app or they're a gym fitness app. And we were like, these are great apps and people should still use them for those specific things because they have special features for those specific things, which is great. But there needs to be some app that's actually putting them all together, because you can't say just from a meditation app that you're going to be healthier because you did this much meditation, or from a gym fitness app you're going to be healthy because of that. You just can't know that. And so putting them together was needed. And so we just kind of had to, as a founder, you kind of at a certain point get very good at ignoring some people's advice.
I think, and I know that, in many ways, I think what the app does is things that we wanted to put together as an app in the first place, because the challenge always was that, you have the genetics, you have your blood work, you have all that information, you get some clear recommendations from your counselor and a doctor and all of that. But you want instant feedback, right? I think that instant feedback is always helpful. And I think even now, sometimes when I'm constantly monitoring a lot of different, whether it's my ring or watch and all, but I think I like the way humanity puts all the pieces together. It reminds me that I should go meditate, I should do this, I should do that. And it also is giving me a score that's constantly changing. So I think in health, you can't really say that, do one thing. If you eat well, you're okay. Because if you eat well and you don't exercise, you're not getting the benefit of that. If you don't have friends, then you're missing out on some of that. So I think there are many things that people forget, that health is a complex subject. But I think the simpler and the more gamified you can make it, I think makes it a lot more valuable for an average user. And I'm talking as an average user here. Right.
Yeah, and I think you named the thing that also gets said a lot, is that health is very complex, but unfortunately, which is true. Unfortunately, that's usually used as a reason not to do something, either as a government project or as a company, or and I think that's wrong. It's very complex, but if only we had a way to monitor ourselves and have something in our pocket that could give us feedback and be connected to large data sets in the internet, then it wouldn't be complex. And our message is, hey, we now have all those things. It's you can get your genetics kit at delivered to your house. You can get your results. You can monitor your biological age. You can get advice, and that is personalized advice because it's reading off of your sensors. And so now is the time for us to actually get this to everybody, right?
So you mentioned that you have about 175,000 users, and you also mentioned some average. But what happens to the people who are aging faster than, let's say, what is the motivation? What happens? Like on an average, how many percentage people are aging slower? How many are aging faster than their biological age? Is there any number that is public, or?
We don't have a public number on that. We're very. I think there is a way to give a public number on that that's privacy conscious, but we're always err on the side of so we speak to people's behavior changes. We don't at this moment speak to. We do actually, but to take that back one step, we do actually keep a number of years added, because that is our mission, to get to that billion years. And so we're somewhere north of 100,000 years added back to humanity. We expect that to, as we go, to kind of accelerate, and also great partnerships with folks like, Map My Genome, I think will accelerate that as well. So
let's move, since you mentioned Map My Genome, let's start with what is epigenetics, because for a lot of people, I think they're not very clear what epigenetics is, and in many ways it is something that is on top of the genetics. But how does that sort of add up to, that also gives you a biological clock. You also come up with a biological clock even without doing an epigenetic test. So maybe if you can help us understand, the basics of each, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of times I'm on like mainstream podcasts where I'm the expert on the thing. So feel free to jump in if I err from the from the reality of genetics. I'll give my mainstream view of it from my few courses. So try to put this in so one thing I tell people about health is like if you're, especially if you're a person that likes to consume a lot of health content, you're reading different blogs or it's so important to have a mental framework, because if you don't have a mental framework, you're really at the mercy of whatever the woman or man wants to tell you. And they have a lot of different interests. And a lot of times it's not even their interests. It's kind of like they just are loose with their wording. And so if you don't have a mental framework to kind of hang things onto, you can end up with a lot of information that doesn't really make sense, or it might not be totally correct. And so I'll try to give a mental framework here. So where do we start? So I think one mental framework is this kind of like, how does the body work? How does the body signal things to happen in the body? And so you have, everybody knows, DNA, or, they know the name. So you have your DNA, your letters. And so those are, the possible, in the main things, one of the main things, and that is the genes. And so, which are just small portions, the small portions of the genetics. And so each gene can produce a protein. And so basically when you get your genetics, you basically kind of know which proteins you're able to produce. You don't know if you're going to produce them, but you know that you're able to produce them. And some of the, bad kind of genetic diseases are sometimes when proteins are knocked out. So the gene is disabled and you don't have a protein that's like super important for development in some tissue in your body. And so you have your genes that can, but you don't know if they're producing proteins. Then you have your DNA methylation. And so the body does this amazing thing, and this is an oversimplification, but this whole thing is, your body does this amazing thing. It's able to turn on and off genes. And effectively, that means turn on and off production of proteins based on what it thinks it needs to keep homeostasis, keep healthy. And so when you're then measuring your DNA methylation, it's basically the body turns on and off genes by putting a methyl group, just a chemical group, a compound group on that gene, and it effectively turns it off. It's not able to read it and become a protein. And it can put it on, it can take it off. And so your DNA methylation changes daily, but it changes over time. And so that's a closer way to know which genes are actually producing proteins. You can take one step further, but it gets a lot more expensive, is you can test blood. But then when you want to have that same coverage of all those proteins, that can be really expensive. And so you end up testing the more kind of, not necessarily important, but the more common, the more, established, proteins and hormones. And so that's your progression, is you have genes that may or may not produce a protein. You can test your genetics to know that, your predisposition. You have your DNA methylation, which then tells you which genes are turned on and off, which basically you can then know that there's at least some of that protein being produced in that particular tissue. And then you have testing your blood, and you can see which proteins and hormones are flowing around your blood. The other sidetrack to that, which is now you guys are doing a great job starting to get this out to your consumers, to your folks, is the microbiome. And so we have genetics that create a bunch of proteins, like us, Anu, Mike, our genetics. But then we have a bunch of bacteria that live in us, and those bacteria produce proteins. And so measuring your microbiome then gets you an understanding of many things, but one of them, which proteins your bacteria in your body might be producing. And so that's why that gives you extra coverage. And don't quote me on this number, but it's a significant number. Like it's more than 1%. It's less than 30%. Yeah. And so it's meaningful. It's a meaningful amount of the proteins and things being produced in your body. And so that's kind of, so if you want to know what's being produced in your body, those are your levels of checking your genetics to see what's possible to produce, your DNA methylation, which you should do repeatedly, every 6 months or whatever, to see how that's changing, which genes are being turned on and off, and to give just some kind of concreteness to that. So when you're doing stuff like exercising more, eating better, or sleeping better, and that combination, your body is then adjusting to turn on and off genes. And so why is that important is you could have a predisposition to something not so healthy. You have a gene that could produce too much of a protein or a protein that you don't really want. Your body could actually, because of exercise and eating better and doing things that will make you, healthier, can actually turn off that gene. And so then when you're measuring DNA methylation, you can start to understand whether you're heading in a healthier direction of the genes that are turned on and off, or less healthy. The last piece of that is then, okay, great. So we're measuring all these things. We know which proteins may be produced or are being produced, or which genes are turned on and off. How do we know if that's good or bad? And that's where the longitudinal data comes in. And so when you're looking at these biobank data sets where the people have had all these things measured on them in the past, their genetics, their DNA methylation, their blood markers, their, in our case, also their movement patterns and their heart rate patterns, which we can get into like digital, then you're able to then say, oh, well, this combination of those genetic variants or DNA methylation profile, or these blood markers or these movement patterns seem to have led to heart attacks earlier, or seem to have led to a much healthier, longer life. And so that's where the longitudinal data sets then give meaning to all these measurements. So that mental framework of why should you do certain things along the line, hopefully that helps people kind of then understand, like, in everything that's measured on a person in those longitudinal data sets. So a person in the, say, UK biobank, anything that's been measured on them, and then you have what happened to them health-wise, becomes a predictor. Some of them are stronger predictors for future, and some of them are less strong, and some combination is sometimes stronger. But everything is a predictor, even their, where they grew up, or, and anything becomes a predictor. So.
True. And I often like to say that, sometimes when you look at epigenetics, it's like those, you have those switchboards, but the ones that can increase or decrease your light intensity, right?
Yeah.
So you can switch it on and off, but it is in very levels of intensity, because when you are, doing more exercise or eating better and all, maybe that is changing those genes in the right form of, in the right way. But not necessarily completely on and completely off. Sometimes it might be a little bit, there and not there. And that's why I think it is complex and important to measure it in many different angles. But I think we didn't get to how you do this thing beautifully with just, even without the genetics. I think you're currently, for instance, the Humanity app also measures it. So are you looking at things like your heart rate variability? Are you what are those inputs that are coming in to come up with the aging score? Let's assume without the genetic piece.
Yep. Yeah. So we came across, so our question when we started Humanity then was, okay, how predictive can these different predictors be, and which ones actually were measured around the world in these biobanks, so that we know what they mean in the future. We came across a great company, Geer, that we're still partnered with, that do great stuff on basically taking these kind of digital markers, these movement patterns, these heart rate patterns, and then creating a good kind of understanding of what they mean for future health. And so we take them as one of our feeds, and we also do a bunch of internal calibration on that. And so what effectively it's built on is, the UK biobank is mostly what it's built on now, and this is actually quite a bit of forethought if you think about it. So if I told you today, hey, they're taking people into a biobank and they're hooking on accelerometers to them and the heart rate monitors to them, you'd be like, yeah, that sounds like a good thing to do. That sounds like an obvious thing to do. 20 years ago, not so much. And so they were very, luckily for us, and a lot of these biobanks I think should be considered heroes. Luckily for us, they hooked on accelerometers. So basically, people, about 100,000 of the people that were taken into the UK biobank, they just had their movement patterns for weeks and weeks and weeks monitored. And then for those same people, you know what happened to them into the future health-wise. Same thing for heart rate. And so you end up with a very frequency of measurements and how long that goes on can many times greatly compensate for any noise that might happen in that data. If you think about it, like blood markers at best are measured like once every 3 months, even people that are like really on it, right? And so you end up with, yes, they're very direct, fairly direct, measures of the body, but they're so infrequent. And so that kind of evens out. And so what we found out is actually that movement pattern and heart rate pattern has very, very close to the same predictive power as bloods. The great thing is if you then add blood measurements in, you get even higher predictive power, the combination of the two. And, you add in genetics, you add in DNA methylation, same effect. And so that was something that we were going to create humanity either way, but that was something that really excited us when we found out we could do that, because our mission is to bring this to everybody. I think what we'll see as we move forward is it's so important for a large amount of people to be getting their genetics, be getting their DNA methylation, be getting like a whole swath of these tests, so that we have these great data sets where you can actually map between the different biomarkers. And so it's very much, there's not one biomarker to rule it all. And actually, the more things you get measured as a person gives you higher accuracy, and it just helps everybody, because then we start to understand, how things are connected.
Yeah. So basically, you're saying that if for an average person, they install the Humanity app, they will get a good sense of how they're aging. But if they add to that blood tests, they add to that genetics and the epigenetics, it becomes a lot more precise. And so for people who are very interested in finding out, those little tiny improvements, for instance, like an elite athlete would be very keen on seeing some small changes. But for some people, it might be enough to just measure it on, without having to do multiple tests. But a genetic test, in my view, is a good thing to do because you're doing it only once, right? And even the methylation. So, it depends on how much you can access or afford these tests. But I think in many ways, I think you've been able to democratize this whole concept of aging for a large population.
Exactly. And I think, so we could go through each one, but don't want to take the time. But with genetics, you have some very stark predisposition stuff that the earlier you detect, the much better for you and your family. I think with DNA methylation, the greatness of that is going into the future, it will be, so it's one step up from knowing which proteins are in your blood, but tells you a lot. And and genetics in general, that price point isn't rising up. If anything, it's lowering a little bit, right? And so whereas blood testing has kind of stayed at the same price for as long as I've been alive, kind of thing. So DNA, it's basically like, how can I optimize to get the most useful information that then either humanity or whatever system I'm using can then help me optimize from. And so I think genetics and DNA methylation, along with digital markers like movement pattern and blood, will be the stars. I am also quite positive on microbiome, because as we said, that's such a, it's a significant part of the proteins that are being produced as well. And I think the more we get data sets that kind of give us insight into what the different results from the microbiome are giving us, that will become more and more useful. I think growing up, you always think of like, get rid of all the bacteria in your body, and then you start learning more and more of the science, and you're like, oh no, don't want to do that. I want to keep out. All of them are helping me so much.
Yeah, I'm glad my parents didn't advocate too much of for us to have too many of those, antibacterial, So it is a good thing in some ways, right? I mean, for people who've had too much of, then they become resistant to some of the good bacteria as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, antibiotics, a fantastic thing that started to save, millions and millions of lives. Our kind of misunderstanding for years of that, we're not a tabletop that we just want to scrub clean. And I think that was a misunderstanding for a few years. Germs bad, get rid of them all. I think that's hurt us quite a bit, but I think people are coming around to that with probiotics and all that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, eventually, I think over a period of time, even the methylation tests will become a lot cheaper. And maybe at some point of time, I think they might replace some of the blood tests that we are currently doing, right? And that
I think so.
everything can be done at your home. You don't have to get a phlebotomist to actually collect your blood. Everything you should be able to do most of these things, by just doing this at home. And maybe at some point, who knows, even your actual test may be performed at your home as well, right? So that's quite possible.
Exactly. Yeah.
So when you think of the, right now we are in 2024, if you think of the future, where do you see humanity heading towards? And by humanity, I mean also the humanity.
I think that we're all members of.
Correct. Yes. Do you think that, there'll be some significant changes in terms of how people look at, just living better? Where do you see the future?
Yeah, I think if you had asked me that question, I might have had a similarly optimistic answer 2 years ago, but I wouldn't have maybe been internally as sure about my answer, or not have the outward proof points to back up my optimism. But LLMs, kind of the finally mainstreamization of AI, and I would say the mainstreamization of that patterns can be found in data, and those patterns are hugely leverageable to help people. That has now been made clear to people. They're like, how does this, chat bot now understand everything that I'm saying it and answer back, in a way that makes me not sure if it's a chat bot. I think that's now made me even more optimistic. That's especially, and this is probably cognitive bias, but like folks like you and I and others that are spending our lives really trying to bring all this directly to people. I think now that's going to have a big push behind it, because it will be more and more clear that measuring yourself will allow you insights that will be very actionable and that will really help you, and you'll be able to see that quite quickly. And I think once people, getting back to one of my points that I didn't like when we started going around was that 80% of people don't care about their health. I think once these tools, these tests and these tools, like Humanity and Map My Genome, get out to more and more people, and people take actions and they actually improve their health, I think it'll be made very clear that almost everybody cares about their health, and they just didn't really have great tools to do anything about it before. So my prediction of the future is that we should push on more open collaboration, which is why it's so exciting that we're starting to work together. And I think that includes in data, keeping user data more private, but opening up the patterns that are found in data for everybody to build on. And I think that will cause a real acceleration in the space. So that combination of consumers having more and more tools that make a massive difference in their health, and that adoption will grow very quickly. And that combination of us actually opening up a lot of these patterns, and then anybody can build on top of them, right? I think with the internet, the example I always give, and I had the honor of spending some time with Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the World Wide Web. He didn't invent the internet, he invented the World Wide Web. And the internet was basically a communication channel between some government departments and some universities. Great, useful, but not anywhere near the impact that we then saw that happened when Tim and his team came in and basically created a way for everybody to interact with the internet. And so that opening up to everybody to interact with something is such a powerful thing. So I think that's going to be one of the big accelerators.
So you think everybody will ultimately come together, and each piece that everybody is doing will ultimately help in making humanity better, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the health equity, I really don't want to oversimplify that issue, but one of the big things that can help with that is a lot of people are kept out of, they might have an interest in doing something in health, they want to make other people healthier, and they're kept out of it for various reasons. And so the more open, the more person on their laptop in their living room is able to actually, if they have the intent and some idea to make people healthier, is actually able to action that, we'll see amazing things happen, and we'll see that people will work more on the issues that affect them, because then they're able to. And we'll see a much higher diversity of things that are worked on in health because it's opened up.
So Michael, can you, if we look at an example of a user, let's say a lazy person in their, let's
Careful with the labels. Person not doing much.
not doing much yet, right? Like what, and then
Yes,
came to humanity. Or let's say did a genetic test first and then, installed the humanity app. Or, any person that maybe you can tell us that, somebody who is not really doing much from a health perspective today, any case that you've seen where they completely switched around and they really saw a complete, change in terms of how they look at health and their own longevity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so we got a huge amount of motivation in the early days of humanity when we were like, we literally knew every user. They weren't actually related to us, but like they opted
You
in to
followed
like be
them.
beta
Yeah.
users, and like we had conversation, calls with them and stuff like that. One woman moved country because she finally, like, she knew that she wanted to get more, nature and more, walks outside, and she was just living in the middle of kind of a not so nice urban area that didn't, for her, allow her to really, do that. So yeah, using the app for a couple weeks, she then decided to move country. We were a little bit weirded out by that. We were like, oh shit, I hope we're doing the right thing. But yeah, it worked out very well for her. And so it was that kind of like, yeah, I kind of knew I needed to do this thing, and then this thing finally, it was concrete in my hand telling me that I needed to do it, kind of thing. Not move, but like get more movement and get outside. I think within the team, there's been some great anecdotes of people's parents that were definitely in the category of, he never does anything and doesn't want to, kind of, and those was very pleasantly surprised. People would come into a team meeting being like, my dad, like, he is just, he's a different person. He's going for walks, didn't even know he had like walking shoes, like, kind of. So I think it's those, and it's not all about like walking and exercise, but it was those kind of like, it was finally the thing that people do really better, and I think some people especially do better when they can have the information and not have someone else have the information, interpret the information, and then tell them what to do. Some people don't really interact well with that. But when they're given, yeah, I think there's a lot of founders that probably fall into that category. It helps us in certain ways. It doesn't help us in other ways. But when that's given, the information is really brought in front of them, and not just a chart of like, hey, your HRV has gone up and down. It's like, I don't really know what HRV is. But like really like interpret it to it enough of a level that it's actionable. And in our case, actually like, hey, you should do 10 minutes of this. Some people and a lot of people do a lot better with that. And so that's what we've seen to be, people not knowing that things were healthy actions, then finding out they were. People that finally had pure data telling them that they should probably do something, as opposed to their husband or wife or a doctor. And so that's been some of the great stories that we've seen happen. And then in the numbers, as you noted as well, like, just seeing okay, but are we doing this for a large amount of the people? So seeing that median, behavior change has been really, really nice.
So Mike, how long would you like to live?
I hear that question less and less, which it's not that I mind the question. It's just I think it's also part and parcel of longevity becoming part of health and no longer this like
separate thing. Yeah.
eccentric thing on the side. I want to honestly, I love life. I'm loving life. I want to, if I'm generally fully functional and able to enjoy the things that I like in life, I want to live, forever. I don't see a point where that will change. And so I think what I love about the question is it's good for people to think about it. What I don't like about the question is I think a lot of times people put this constraint on it that doesn't exist and actually probably could never exist, which is, oh, we're choosing for everybody. And so I would always say, like, I want the option to continue to live forever. I want that option to be mine. I want that option to be yours and new. I want that option to be everybody watching this podcast and their families. I want each and every one of them to have the option. And I think we'll look back in 100 years. Hopefully we actually will look back in 100 years and just be weirded out by the fact that it was such a kind of like question that people struggled with. And I think, not to get into any kind of political stuff, but like freedom, optionality, that doesn't impinge on other people's optionality. Like this seems like the stuff that we should be promoting. And I think in health, it hasn't been promoted as much as it should.
I agree. I think once you have the choice, you can then decide, what you want to do. But I think right now, I think most of us or most people, at least like my dad's generation and before that, I think there was sort of this expectation that, you will deteriorate quite rapidly after a certain age. And I think today we can stop that deterioration. And I think if we can get to a point where it's up to us, I think then, we've reached the right point at which we say that, okay, we've managed to understand what health is all about, right? Because I think so far healthcare has always been about treating the sick rather than saying, how do I continue to remain healthy? How do I keep the maintenance of my body at a pace where, I can continue to live the way I am today? And I think, that whole perception is changing. And I think that sort of gets us to that whole realm of saying, okay, maybe now that it's our choice, then it's a different story altogether. Yeah. It's not that you know that you're going to die at X age, and therefore, what you do with life is very different versus, let's say, if today I can decide I'm going to be alive till 100, then I have very different set of things to pursue, right? In some ways, yeah.
Exactly. How many more companies are you going to start? How many more people are you going to meet? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things where we did a study on longevity, and there we mostly looked at genetic markers, right? Mm-hmm. So it was quite fascinating. We looked at people who were over 90, and while the sample size was not huge, it was 130 people that we started with. And we found some very interesting 11 or 12 markers that were quite fascinating, of which some of them were interesting things like shorter height and other things. But there were also personalities or phenotypes. And of them, one of them was that stubborn women live longer. And short, stubborn women live longer. So it was quite interesting. And I was just trying to see if maybe what you should do is to see in your app, if you can sort of do some sort of a correlation and see whether that is indeed is some correlation in that or not at all.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing there is then the question of, so what we do is we start to cohort people into different, fairly large categories still, and see which combination of actions work best for their category, right? For people like them. And there's quite a bit of difference. To give you one example, so, and I won't name the cohorts because really, like, you got to use the app for it all to be integrated together, and so I don't want to send people off in a wrong direction. But so the two of the cohorts, it's very clear, like data significance, that moderate heart rate zone exercise does not make them healthier. It's not that it's not, it's maybe slightly net negative, but like, you know, it's not hurting them so much as it's just not helping them. It's not impactful to improving their health. And so whereas you get a lot of, like, in the you know, fitness content now is like, you know, zone two, that's, you know, that kind of like moderate heart rate zone stuff is actually not for, you know, let's call it like 20% of the population. And people come in and out of categories based on changes to their body as well, is not really helping them at all. And so that person might be struggling to go out on like a 20-minute jog every day, and it's actually doing nothing to make them healthier. It's probably just stressing them out. Whereas other people, it might be really helping them. And so in the past, very understandable why public health was unable to give separate messaging, because it's so hard to get any message out to the public. And, you know, you need to keep it very simple, like exercise, good, you know, like, you know, sleep, good. But we're past that point now. You know, we all have these phones in our pocket. And so and it's very clear that in genetics, right? So like, you know, if you're, you know, so you could probably name a whole list of these things, but one that catches me when you get into this kind of like people really trying to overtly help their health, like keto diet, right? And so some people are just not dissolving lipids in their blood very well.
Absolutely, yeah.
And if they're doing a keto diet, that's like accelerating towards heart attack diet. But for other people, it's actually helping them quite a bit. And if you don't know those differences, it's really, I would go so far as to kind of irresponsible to like be heavily promoting everybody do this thing. And so but there's an easy way to find out which category you're in, right? And so I think that's the great thing about the time that we're in. We don't need to sit there and be like, it's complex, so don't do anything. It's actually, no, it's people are different. So find out what's going to work for you and do it. And here's these tests and these applications that will help you find out, and, you know, they'll tell you what to do. So that's the beauty of the time that we're in now.
I agree. I mean, I think earlier, I remember growing up, I think, you know, for instance, even things like your vitamins, right? I remember my dad would say, take a multivitamin, right? And I think that was about what we were asked to do at that point of time.
I took my Flintstones.
Yeah.
Maybe a US thing, but
yeah. So I think at that point was for you, same thing in India, right? We had these little calcium tablets and we had multivitamins. And my dad would make me take these every day, which was a good thing. I think not a lot of people don't do that. But today, I think we can personalize a lot of that based on your genetic makeup. You can personalize these based on where you are, based on your blood markers. You can personalize this based on so many things. You will have markers for magnesium and vitamins and all of that. So I think there's so much that has happened in this space that I think people don't realize that it's quite simple to be able to sit at home, get this information, personalize everything, because ultimately I think that's what is going to give you the most benefit, right? Not the standard diet that everybody told you, or not the standard exercise is good for you. Because for some people, you know, like me, I have the sprint genes and I don't like running marathons. I think you are a you are a runner and you run every day, right? Like, and you enjoy that as well. Right?
Yeah.
So I think
not marathons. I did the New York Marathon once, but but yeah, shorter runs for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but you like running, right? I mean, I mean, I do run, but I don't do long distance.
Just for the listeners, just so they know that Anu is probably having like flashbacks to me trying to force her to go running in the morning on trips that we're on. But yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's a good thing, right? I mean, if you enjoy running and you have the propensity to run, you know, long distance or short distance, I think that's a good thing to be able to go with the flow in some ways.
Yeah, exactly. And then, but you could find out that actually, you know, you would be better off doing 10 minutes of HIIT
I agree.
and just making sure you walk around all day, which is a prevalent phenotype of people. And so yeah, I think that's the and don't do that if you got 2 hours of sleep, kind of thing. Like make sure the combination needs to be right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, so in your opinion, as a personal, like, I mean, not as from the app perspective, what are the top 4 things that people should watch out, from a health perspective? Let's assume they did the genetics, they did all the tests, but other than that, what should they be watching out for?
Yeah. Not to ignore your stipulation on the question, but just because I think it gets ignored in all content, almost all content that goes out, is if you're not this idea that measure yourself with these tests and with the Humanity app, do things that you think will make you healthier, then measure yourself again. 95% of people aren't doing that process fully. They're doing a lot of stuff, but they're not doing that measure yourself, do the stuff, measure yourself again. And you don't see much of the content creators talking about it either. And so even with their good intentions, they end up just sending people off doing a bunch of stuff for a month. They don't get a feedback loop, so they stop doing it. And then they read a blog post a month later, start doing some stuff, then stop again. And so I think that's number one, is like, if you don't know what your biological age is and you don't know what your genetics are, don't worry about doing anything. Get that done and then worry about doing stuff. And hopefully that's a very quick progression of a couple weeks. Second thing is this mental framework of that the combination of things makes a huge difference. I'll give an example, like in blood glucose, right? And so when people start looking at their metabolic health, they start, and this is what leads to, diabetes and these very large diseases. You're looking at your blood glucose, and one of the things that seems to be apparent in a lot of the data is that if you're spiking your blood glucose in your blood too often and for too long, it can lead to the whole system becoming less sensitive and adjusting itself not so well, like insulin, desensitivity and stuff like that. And the other part of that triangle that no one talks about is cortisol. And so if you're stressed out, no matter what you're doing, you might not be able to lose weight because the cortisol releases more blood glucose into the bloodstream and causes all the bad stuff to get out of joint. And so the combination of things, and you see with blood glucose, like and this is different for everybody, so don't take this as the roadmap, but like if you're eating that thing that's really bad for you, whatever that is in your mind, with some leafy vegetables, you eat the leafy vegetables and then you eat that thing that's really bad for you right afterwards, you might not see a glucose spike, right? And so this idea that thing is exclusively bad for you is simply incorrect. It's just not what any of the data that we now have says. But it can be quite bad for you if you eat it by itself, right? Or if you go for a walk after you eat that meal, it might completely, it might keep that spike from being half as high as it would have been otherwise. And so that combination of things is extremely important. Not just like, oh, that's a nice thing to improve upon. No, it's like it makes bad things good and good things bad. The combination of things you're doing. And so the big things that we monitor in the app, maybe just to make it as like a third point, is your main categories of lifestyle action. And this is not a scientific thing. It's more just how we think about it category wise. It's kind of like you have your movement, you put all your kind of exercise stuff in there. You have your nutrition, and that includes, and one of the things we monitor now is kind of like when you eat, how many meals, kind of really macro stuff, but what you eat is also important. You have your rest. And so that's, sleep, but also like the things that lead towards good rest. So, your exercise might lead towards better rest. You're, getting natural light, early in the morning might, even though it's at the beginning of your day might greatly affect the end of your day, you know. And then the last one that we want to do more on, but we have a category for, and we do like your mood and stuff is mind. So just your mental happiness and health. So, and so those are the things that I think people need to have all those things working in conjunction. And so we try to make that super easy for people, because if you're missing one of them, the whole thing can go out of whack. So
I think you summarized all of the points really well. I've been, over the last 1 year, I focused on my sleep. And now I'm focusing also on stress. I think you can calculate it on the ring also. So I'm trying to see how to get some of that. And I've been quite successful. I think, it's not so difficult to do it. When you can measure, I think anything that you can measure, I think you can improve.
yeah. Are you going off of HRV mostly, or is it?
I think it is based off HRV, right? And it was also watching what I was doing. I don't know exactly how they're measuring it, but right now I think that's what is showing in over there. And I think again, same thing. Feedback, immediate feedback, I think is always helpful, right? If you know, when you were mentioning about the insulin resistance, I think for many weeks I wore a CGM to find out exactly what spikes my blood sugar and what doesn't. I've worn a blood pressure thing to find out if there's something that is. So I experiment a lot with myself. But I think, for most people, I think you don't have to do all the crazy things I do, but I think it's helpful to understand,
Well, we're the guinea pigs, right? We test everything so that we can bring the most easy to use and useful stuff to our
absolutely
users.
Yeah. So I think if people just use like the app, I think you'll be able to see the 4 or 5 things that you mentioned. I think sleep was one of the big things that you there. Fasting was another thing that was measured. How you communicate and so many other really nice things that are there, and you have to check in every day. So I think that's the beauty of the app.
Yeah, the thing that's really, just as a personal story, the thing that's really helped me, and you probably can identify with this, as a founder of a company, we can probably disappear from our friend group for weeks and weeks on end when we go deep on something, or we're like super heads down on a project, right? But human connection is a massive, health factor. Probably the easiest path that you can see there is that it reduces stress and reduces cortisol, reduces chronic inflammation, but it does a bunch of other stuff. And so, just the prompt to message. You've probably gotten 1 or 2 of my messages, like,
yes.
kind of like, how are you? But if not, we would talk to each other less often, just because both of us are super busy and we're doing our stuff, right? So yeah, I think those little prompts are so useful, and even for me as a person that created it. So.
All right, Mike. I think we've crossed an hour, so I want to get to the other part of this podcast, which is sort of a rapid fire. Can I start on that?
Sure. Are you doing them too, or is it one way?
Yeah, you can ask me as well. But what is the most common complaint about you by your friends? I don't have any, but
I got rid of those friends that complain. I think I'm extremely curious, and if I latch on to an idea that someone's talking about, I want to know everything about it. And I've been told that can sometimes feel like an inquisition, where I'm just like asking rapid fire questions like this, but I'm just like, I'm in my mind, I'm like mapping out this cool thing that they just told me, and I'm like, figuring it all out. And I've been told that can be not the most pleasant experience for the person receiving the questions. Although some friends, and I think you would be in that category, like we just go at it and it's great.
Yeah, I mean, I've never felt that. So maybe it's just people who, I think I enjoy when people ask questions. So on my T-shirt, it says curiosity is in my DNA. So.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Curiosity is the key thing to everything.
All right. So I think I know the answer, but are you a morning person or a night person?
So I'm a morning person, and I can give you, I know this is supposed to be rapid fire, but just because I wanted to, there's a geeky science thing that I want to put into your brain and people listening. So I was fasting. I was doing like a 48-hour fast, and I was wearing a CGM, continuous glucose monitor. And so I noticed that when I looked at my readings, when I woke up, that I had my glucose was rising, almost like meal level kind of rising. And I was like, okay, what's happening? And then because I had never, and just because almost no one in the mainstream kind of talks about it this way, I never knew that cortisol could release. Cortisol is one of the things that wakes you up in the morning.
Yeah.
And so it basically releases, I think, out of the liver. It might be, correct me if I'm wrong. It releases glucose into the bloodstream. And so what I was seeing in my fasted state was this pure like cortisol at work, which I think is actually something that we should look at in the future, or anybody that wants to take it and run with it, is we probably could measure if you have heart rate and you have glucose, like continuous glucose, time of day, you could probably start to measure out what's cortisol and what's caused by food and exercise. And so so I found out I was a morning person. I knew I was a morning person before that, but I statistically found out that I was a morning person when I was wearing a CGM, because I saw I think it was going up at like 5:45 a.m. or something at that point. So.
And you didn't check a genetic test to see if you're a morning person or a night person?
I don't think I have. Yeah, is that part of the?
It is there. And so it's
nice.
interesting. So I think for many years, I think I slept for 4 hours, right? I mean, and I knew it was bad, but anyway, I've gotten up to 6 hours and over the last, I think at least a year now. And what was interesting was my genetics said I'm a morning person, but I was sleeping at 2 in the morning and then getting up at 6:37. So it was not very clear what person I mean, clearly I was staying up late at night. But what I've found over the last few months, when I've started actually sleeping early and getting up early, is that I'm actually a lot more productive. And so maybe I am a morning person and things have changed around for me, or I'm just getting old. I don't know. Either way.
Yeah.
So
no, I think that's the thing, right? Is because you're a morning person, you were unable to get up later. But you were kind of, with caffeine or whatever or just being excited about something, was able to keep yourself up. And so the unmovable object, or the less movable object, is the getting up time. And so the only way to add more hours of sleep, which is important, is to add them at the beginning. Yeah.
So any book that you can recommend?
Yes. Getting back to human connection, but I think just a theory of humans. Humankind, A Hopeful History by Rutger Bregman.
I haven't read that.
Such a good book. It basically, I mean, those of us that kind of geekily follow science, but like science as a category, and sorry for any sociologists listening, but like sociology has just been is the bastion of unreproducibility. You have so many foundational things that have never been reproduced and eventually get overturned. And so a lot of our kind of tenets that, the selfish gene, people have gone back and recanted, sorry, who was the author of The Selfish Gene? Yeah. So he's gone back and recanted a bunch of the stuff. Not that he was misleading people at the time, but he just said, some of that stuff I now know is actually doesn't work that way. And but no one wants to cover that story. And so people are continuously kind of led towards this, we're all going to go to anarchy, left to our own devices as humans. And humankind does a really good job of kind of laying out the real science. And it might be biased in its kind of intention, but it's quite a good book to read if you want to have a little bit more faith in humanity. So. That's
a great book to read there. Any favorite destination or vacation spot that you have?
I think it's always the people that kind of make the place. I've never been to India, so that's an obvious oversight.
You need to change that.
that will
Yeah.
be changed as soon as possible. Um, I like water, so I think I live in London in the middle of the city. So I almost like cling to the canal, which is kind of a funny thing to think about. It's not the cleanest kind of like, most beautiful water, but so yeah, I like being on the coast places. And so yeah, usually go to luckily my mom lives in Florida, so can double up on visiting her and being on the beach. So
It's great. You have any questions or you?
yeah, well, I mean, just well, I guess I'll start with the more meaningful, but then we should get back to favorite destination. What brought you to I mean, anything that you want to share, kind of what brought you to create Map My Genome, and what do you see as the kind of next 5 years for you guys?
So for me, I think I got into genomics in 2000. So that was a long time back. And at that point, I was in the US, moved back to India, started Ossimum, which was my first company. And we were doing a lot of great work with pharmaceutical companies and biotech. It was mostly B2B, right? So we would do a lot of research work. We had a lot of software that we would produce for the pharmaceutical companies and also research institutions. We then acquired 3 companies across the globe, one in Netherlands, one in Germany, and one in the US. We became one of the largest genomic services players. But the challenge for me was like, you're doing all these great things. One, there wasn't enough data for the Indian population. So I said, how do you, if 1/6 of the world is Indian, how do I get people to actually, make use of this whole personalization that is happening right now? That was one thing.
Yeah.
The second thing was I badly wanted to do something that benefits the average person, right? And I think that's how Map My Genome was started. And when we started, it started with one genetic test, right? We said we'll start with one product and take that to the next, take that to the masses. And clearly being the first in the market is usually a difficult thing. But we started, we persisted, and today we have a full portfolio of products, both on the clinical side as well as on the consumer. And we continue to build on various different areas, whether it is, the whole space of longevity and well-being on one side, and then looking at cancer and reproductive health and rare diseases on the other. And what is fascinating for me is that, it took a long time for people to even, to know that we do something like this. And today, I think suddenly everybody wants to say, how do I live longer? How do how do you get access to genetic testing? How do I, so I think it's been a fascinating journey so far. But I think a lot of things that you did on humanity was putting pieces together. And we had done some parts of it by using AI and machine learning, by putting biomarkers and the genetics together. But I think ultimately it's how you deliver it to the end user. And I think by putting our, information, from both sides together, I think we'll be able to truly change a lot of the way people actually look at health and how can you actually democratize this for everybody. So I think that's where we are today. But next 5 years, I think there's, very exciting times. I think cost of epigenetic testing will come down. I think LLMs will, become much smarter, better. But I think at the same time, I think so access to information about health will become more better. But ultimately, people will have to personalize it for themselves, right? So I think that's where we are heading towards.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I'm so excited about our collaboration. And yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of stuff we can do together and we'll very quickly get the genetics and the DNA methylation combined completely into the Humanity app as well, which will be awesome working together on. And just for the viewers, I mean, Anu is one of the most loving, mission-driven people. There's a reason why we've been friends since like the first day we were in a room together, is because you just can almost see it in her from across the room, and we've been friends ever since. And so it's very cool to have someone that's operating at your level, reaching so many people, and I have no doubt in my mind is completely in sync on mission and helping humans. So excited about collaborating.
I am very excited about this collaboration. So hopefully we are putting our both our heads together and our passion together. I think we'll be able to deliver more for the end users and customers. So.
Yep. Yeah, and my B2B salesperson will yell at me if I don't say something. But so one of the things we're doing is obviously great collaborations and getting humanity out there and combining it better, easier with other, great products. The other thing, we opened up an API, so anybody can send us either movement pattern or heart rate pattern or blood markers, and send that through the API, and you can get a biological age and a rate of aging back. And so we're constantly trying to find more ways to get that feedback loop out to folks, and some of the stuff we're going to collaborate on with DNA methylation and microbiome and genetics is going to be part of that. So
that'll be amazing, and I think people should listen to that part, that they can find a way to collaborate. All of us can, and I think if everybody puts in pieces in together, I think we'll be able to solve challenges that we face today faster, better, and of course in a much more affordable way as well, right? So
yeah, and it's just more fun if you're running any kind of project or business. It's more fun to collaborate.
I
like if you share a mission with another company, collaborate. It's much more fun. So.
Totally agree. Thank you so much, Mike. I think this was great. I know we could have gone on for 2 more hours, but I had blocked an hour.
We'll see how much people like watching two friends talk for a couple hours. I think it's entertaining.
It's good.
Thank you, Anu.
Thank you.